Hey, and welcome back. We're going to continue our conversation about elasticity by looking at a couple of other measures that economists use to look at um, the relative elasticity of both supply and demand. And we're going to look at um, three today. One is called cross price elasticity, and we'll discuss what that number measures and what it tells us. We'll look at income elasticity, as well as the price elasticity of supply. And by the end, hopefully be able to explain factors that influence these elasticities and begin to interpret the results of them. So we start with cross price elasticity. The purpose of cross price elasticity is to help us determine what happens to the quantity demanded of one good with a change in the price of the other. An example of this might be auto manufacturers trying to decide what will happen to the price to the quantity demanded or the demand for their SUVs if the price of gasoline were to double in price. Right? That would have an impact. People probably wouldn't want big, heavy SUVs. They might want to switch into hybrids or electric vehicles. So knowing the cross price elasticity is very helpful. So what it's measuring is the percent change in quantity demanded for one good given a percent change in the price of another. And like with all the elasticities, I would just get used to writing out the formula because the formula will help you answer the questions. Um, we do care here about the sign. It being either a positive number or a negative number does have significant meaning. With elasticity of demand, we reported it as absolute value, but here we do care what the sign means because it will tell us whether the product is either a substitute good or it's a complementary good to the other. For example, what happens to Reeboks, the demand for Reebok shoes, if the price of Nikes increases? So I can write out the cross price formula, percent change in quantity demanded for one good over percent change in price of the other. And I can tell you that if Nike prices rise, that means that I will purchase fewer Nikes, but now I'm purchasing more Reebok. So it looks to me like I'm not buying as many Nikes. I still need shoes, so I'll buy this other brand. So we've got two positive numbers here. A positive leads to a positive number. And so we can summarize that substitute goods have a positive cross price elasticity coefficient. We could look at two other products, maybe gasoline and SUVs. What happens to the demand for SUVs when the price of gasoline increases? Well, um, we could reasonably say that when price of gas rises, I want less gas. If at the same time I want fewer SUVs, it would seem to indicate to me that these two products go together, that less of one leads to less of another. That's an indication they are complementary in nature. And we'll see that there is a positive number for price change, but it's a negative number for the percent change in quantity demanded. So when you have a positive and negative, the coefficient is negative. So anytime you have a negative cross price elasticity coefficient, now we're talking about complementary goods, one that you consume when you consume the other. And so we can say that when cross price elasticity is zero, then they are unrelated. A change in the price of one leads to no change in the quantity demanded of the other. Well, then they have no connection to each other, right? If the price of eggs goes up, what does that do to the percent change in quantity demanded for tires? Well, they're not related. So it'd be a 0% change for demand for tires. And so not related means they don't matter to each other. Complementary goods have a coefficient less than zero, a negative number, and substitute goods have a positive coefficient, a number greater than zero. Another elasticity we talk about is income elasticity. What happens to the quantity demanded as my income either goes up or down? And this is a more sort of scientific way of looking at a concept we've already discussed in a previous lesson, the idea of a normal good versus an inferior good. So the formula here is the percent change in quantity demanded over the percent change in income. And if you're paying attention, you'll have noticed that all of these elasticities follow the same format, essentially, where percent change in quantity demanded is always in the numerator at the top. So hopefully that helps you keep them straight. So in this case, we're saying, again, sign matters. If it's a positive number, then it's a normal good. If it's negative, it's an inferior good. So for example, if the income elasticity is -2, what it's telling us is, putting in sample numbers, that if my income rises by 1%, that would lead to a drop in my quantity demanded by 2%. As I have more money, I want less of the good. Well, since we live in a world of unlimited demands and desires, but limited resources, normally, if I had more money, I'd want more of the good. But here I want less. And the reason I want less is because it's inferior in nature. I'm only buying it because I can't afford something better. If I could afford something better, I would buy more of it. But I'm not. So this is an example of an inferior good. That negative coefficient means that it is an inferior good by nature. If the coefficient had been positive, then we would have said it's a normal good. My income rose by 1%. I want 2% more than before. Then that would be a positive over a positive. And so that would indicate it's a normal good. We can then break the normal good down into two different categories, either a necessity or a luxury. So we can look at that and say that if the elasticity coefficient for income elasticity is between 0 and 1, we're income inelastic. If it is greater than 1, we are income elastic. Income inelastic indicates a necessity. My income rose and I'm buying more of the good, but not very much of it, largely because I'm already devoting enough resources to getting what I need. So if my income rose by 10%, the odds that I'm going to buy 20% more milk or 20% more eggs or 20% more bread is pretty low. Right? Those are sort of basic staples in most people's diets. And so I'm buying enough of those already because they are necessary for me to survive. Luxuries, on the other hand, will have a much higher income elasticity. If my income goes up by 10%, I might buy 50% more sirloin steaks than I did before because steak's a pretty expensive thing. It's usually something that is special if I were to buy it. But if I have 10 or 20% more income, I can afford these special things more frequently. So the quantity demanded will grow by more than my income. So we do have to keep in mind both normal and inferior, as well as necessities versus luxuries. So for example, if income elasticity is 0.5, that tells me that this ratio is going to be 1/2. So percent change in income will be twice as much in this example as percent change in quantity demanded. So I can put some sample numbers in. It's a positive coefficient, so it's going to be either two positives or two negatives. My income rises by 4% and I want 2% more of the good. It's normal. And because the quantity demanded did not increase by as much as the change in income, it's telling me that I'm already buying pretty much what I need already. A little bit more will make me happy, but I don't need a whole lot more. So that good is a necessity in nature. Final one here is price elasticity of supply, and it is very similar to price elasticity of demand. The only difference is we're talking about the supply curve now and not the demand curve. So the formula is the same, percent change in quantity supplied divided by the percent change in price. That is, what happens to the amount of goods being supplied when the price changes. And just like with demand, the extremes are the same. If elasticity of supply is 0, we are perfectly inelastic. It's a vertical supply curve. If the elasticity is infinite, then it's horizontal in nature. It's perfectly elastic. So it's the exact same thing as demand, only now we're saying supply. What will affect price elasticity of supply? Well, two things, predominantly. One is the availability of inputs, and the other is how much time it takes. Because really what we're trying to measure here is how quickly can suppliers take advantage of an increase in price, as an example. So if the price of a good skyrockets for some reason, can suppliers rapidly increase the quantity supplied to meet that higher price and that increase in demand, or not? And ideally, companies would love to be able to take advantage of that higher price, but they don't always have the ability to do it because their supply is inelastic in nature. So here's an example. The price of microprocessors, semiconductors, skyrocketed during COVID and shortly thereafter. Firms that make semiconductors and processors would love to have taken advantage of this increase in price. Unfortunately for them, they were uh, inelastic. Their elasticity of supply was inelastic because it takes months or years to expand production capacity. It takes a long time to build a plant, to get it zoned and permitted and built and staffed and up and running. It takes them years. By the time it takes them to get started, the price of semiconductors may have already come down. So in this industry, firms tend to be relatively inelastic when it comes to the elasticity of supply. Here's a little bit of practice again, uh, like some of our other lessons. When you go ahead, press pause here in just a moment and see if you can answer the question on your own, and then press play to see how you did. If I told you we have cross price elasticity of 2.45, what type of good are we talking about? And again, using that formula will help you. So go ahead and press pause, come up with the answer, and then press play. If you have a cross price elasticity of 2.45, the positive number matters. It means that if price goes up, the quantity demanded also goes up. So if the price of one good rises, I want less of it. But I also, at the same time, I'm consuming less of one thing, I want more of another. That indicates to me that I've stopped buying good Y, and now I'm buying good X, and so they must be substitutes in nature. Income elasticity of negative 3.4. Again, go ahead and press pause. If I've got negative 3.4, that means that one of these numbers is positive, one is negative. So let's say that income rises by 1%. That means the quantity demanded drops by 3.4%. When my income rises, I want less of the good. That would indicate to me that it is inferior in nature. Income elasticity of 2.7. Is it luxury or a necessity? Go ahead and press pause. First off, we know it's normal because it's a positive number. So increased income leads to wanting more of it. So it's positive. It's a normal number, normal good. Is it luxury or necessity? Well, my income is rising, let's say 1%, and which leads to a change in quantity demanded of 2.7% in order to get that income elasticity number. So my quantity demanded is increasing by a greater percentage than my income. That indicates that I wasn't buying much before, but now that I've got some more money, I want to buy more and more and more of this good. So I wasn't buying it much before, but now I am, and that is an indicator of a good being a luxury. We'll talk more about consumer decision making in our next lesson, and I will talk to you then.